At dinner, Mom snarled, "Sign the condo to your sister or go to jail." Stella sneered, "You're useless." My lawyer and I glanced. I laugh says, "The useless one isn't me, it's." They say blood is thicker than water. It is a cute little phrase people love to throw around when they want you to forgive the unforgivable. People who use that quote usually have normal families. They do not have a mother who sits across from them at a dinner table, looks them dead in the eye, and threatens to send them to federal prison if they do not hand over the deed to their home. But I am getting ahead of myself. That dinner, the screaming, the ridiculous legal threats, all of it was just the grand finale of a circus that had been running for 30 years. My name is Gemma. I am 30 years old, and as I stand on the balcony of my condo, looking out over the Chicago skyline, I finally feel like I can breathe. But to understand how a family dinner turned into a hostage negotiation, you have to understand the kingdom I grew up in. We lived in a massive, split-level house in Naperville, a wealthy suburb about 45 minutes outside of the city. From the outside, my parents, Victoria and Edward, looked like the perfect American couple. They drove nice cars, kept the lawn perfectly manicured, and hosted neighborhood barbecues every summer. But inside that house, there was a strict caste system. And I was at the very bottom. My younger sister, Stella, was the golden child. She is 2 years younger than me, but from the moment she was born, she was treated like royalty. It was not just typical babying. It was an obsession. Our house was a physical manifestation of this favoritism. Stella had the master bedroom on the second floor. It was huge, painted a soft lavender, with a walk-in closet and a canopy bed that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her walls were covered in framed photos of her dance recitals and cheerleading competitions. Then there was my room. I lived in the converted attic space. It was cramped, the ceiling slanted so sharply I had to duck to walk to my bed, and it was freezing in the winter and boiling in the summer. I had a tiny window that rattled every time the wind blew. Whenever I asked my dad if we could fix the draft, Edward would just pat my shoulder and tell me to put on a sweater. He said it would build character. That was their favorite phrase for me. Building character. It was their universal excuse for every time they ignored my needs, denied my requests, or pushed me aside to make room for Stella. I grew up watching my sister get handed the world on a silver platter, while I was told to be grateful I had a roof over my head. If Stella wanted a new dress for a party, my mom would take her to the mall and drop $300 without blinking. If I needed new sneakers for track and field because the soles were falling off mine, I was told to find a part-time job. I learned very early on that if I wanted anything in this life, I was going to have to bleed for it. I did not realize back then just how much they would eventually try to take from me. The contrast between us became aggressively obvious the summer I turned 16. Stella was 14 at the time. My parents decided she was showing a real interest in art and culture, so naturally, they enrolled her in an exclusive, high-end summer camp that took teenagers on a 3-week tour across Europe. I remember watching her pack her brand new designer luggage. She had matching pastel suitcases and a brand new digital camera my dad bought her just for the trip. When she came back, the house was unbearable. She unpacked souvenirs from Italy on the kitchen island, bragging loudly about eating authentic gelato in Florence and taking gondola rides in Venice. My mother, Victoria, hovered over her, gasping at every photo and telling her how sophisticated she was becoming. I did not get a summer camp. I did not go to Italy. While Stella was posing in front of the Colosseum, I was working my first job at a greasy diner right off the highway. I worked 5 days a week, often pulling double shifts that ended at midnight. The smell of old, burnt frying oil seeped into my skin and my hair. No matter how many times I showered, I felt like I smelled like a walking basket of French fries. I still have a faint, silver scar on my left forearm from that summer. A basket of frozen onion rings slipped from my hand and splashed into the deep fryer, sending boiling oil straight onto my skin. I remember biting my tongue to keep from crying out, wrapping it in a paper towel and finishing my shift because I desperately needed the money. I was saving for a used car so I would not have to rely on my parents for rides. When I finally got home that night, Exhausted and in pain, I found Stella sitting on the living room rug, complaining that her feet were sore from walking around European museums. Victoria was massaging her feet. I stood in the doorway, smelling like grease, nursing a burn, and waiting for someone to ask how my day was. Nobody did. When I mentioned the burn, my dad just looked over his newspaper and said that working in food service is a tough gig, but it builds a strong work ethic. It was always about the work ethic for me. I was the workhorse. Stella was the show pony. They never expected me to fail, but they also never expected me to need them. I was the reliable, invisible daughter. I started counting my tips every night at 1 in the morning, stacking the dirty coins and crumpled dollar bills in an old shoebox under my bed. Every single dollar felt like a tiny piece of freedom. I knew I had to get out of that house, and I knew nobody was going to write me a check to make it happen. I was going to have to buy my own way out. The divide between us turned into a massive canyon when it was time for college. I was 18, and my parents sat me down at the kitchen table to have a very serious talk about finances. Edward looked very solemn as he explained that the economy was tough, and they just did not have the funds to help me with a 4-year university. He told me I should look into community college or take out student loans, because learning the value of debt is a crucial adult lesson. I swallowed my disappointment. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out massive federal loans, and enrolled in a state university in Illinois. 2 years later, when it was Stella's turn to go to college, the economy had magically healed. Or at least, their bank accounts had. Stella did not have to write a single essay for a scholarship. She got a fully funded ride to a private university in Boston. Victoria and Edward paid her tuition, her room and board, and gave her a generous monthly allowance. My college years were an absolute logistical nightmare. I worked 2 jobs the entire time. I worked early mornings at the campus bookstore and nights as a waitress at a sports bar. I rented the cheapest off-campus apartment I could find. It was a miserable, ground-floor unit that constantly smelled like wet dog and mold. I will never forget the second week of my sophomore year. We had a massive winter storm, and the roof of my crappy apartment building developed a massive leak. The water dripped directly onto my desk while I was at work, completely ruining 2 rented biology textbooks that cost over $200 each. When I saw the soggy, ruined pages, I sat on the floor and cried until my ribs hurt. I called my mom in a moment of pure desperation, asking if I could borrow just enough to cover the library fine so I could register for next semester's classes. Victoria sighed heavily into the phone. She said, "Gemma, you need to learn to budget better. Emergencies happen. We cannot just bail you out every time you mismanage your money." I hung up, wiped my face, and ate nothing but cheap instant ramen for a month and a half to pay off that fine. The very next weekend, I saw Stella post a photo on Instagram. She was on a spring break trip in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, holding a massive margarita, wearing a brand new swimsuit. The caption read, "Thanks Mom and Dad for the best college getaway." It was right then, sitting in my freezing apartment eating salty noodles, that a very specific part of my heart turned ice cold. I realized they were not broke. They just did not want to spend their money on me. From that day forward, I stopped asking. I stopped calling to check in. I put my head down, worked my terrible jobs, and saved every extra $10 bill I could get my hands on. I graduated with a business degree and a terrifying amount of debt, but I had something Stella did not. I knew exactly how to survive when the world gave you absolutely nothing. After graduation, I did not go looking for a safe corporate job. I had spent 4 years studying business, and I wanted to build something that belonged entirely to me. I took the few $1,000s I had managed to save, took out a terrifying small business loan, and signed a lease on a tiny, run-down commercial space in the Loop in downtown Chicago. I was 22 years old, and I decided to open a coffee shop. If anyone ever tells you that opening a small business is glamorous, they are lying to your face. The first 2 years were brutal. The bureaucracy alone almost broke me. I remember standing in the shop at 3 in the afternoon, fighting back tears because a city health inspector failed my permit application over the exact placement of a hand-washing sink. The banks laughed at me when I asked for a credit limit increase. I was entirely alone. Because I could not afford contractors, I did almost everything myself. I painted the walls a dark, moody green at 3 in the morning, my hands cramping around the roller. When my second-hand espresso machine broke down during the morning rush of my opening week, I could not afford to call a technician. I had to politely ask a line of 10 angry commuters to leave, lock the doors, and spend 4 hours watching internet tutorials, fixing a pressurized steam valve with duct tape and sheer willpower. I practically lived in that shop. I slept on a terrible air mattress in the tiny back office because I was too exhausted to commute back to my cheap apartment. The physical labor was agonizing, but the loneliness was worse. I would stand under the harsh fluorescent lights at midnight, counting inventory, scrubbing milk stains off the counters, and wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. My parents never visited. They never sent a flower arrangement for opening day. They were too busy helping Stella move into her luxury apartment in Boston after she graduated with a degree in communications and 0 job prospects. But slowly, painfully, the shop started to work. I learned the names of the regulars. I perfected my roasting profiles. By the end of year 2, I was actually turning a profit. It was a tiny profit, but it was mine. I paid myself just enough to upgrade from the air mattress to a decent 1-bedroom apartment. I was exhausted, but for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I had built an empire on scraps, and it was finally standing on its own. By the time I turned 25, the business had stabilized enough that I actually had a little bit of disposable income. And this is the part of the story I am almost embarrassed to admit. Despite everything they had done, despite the blatant favoritism and the emotional neglect, a stupid, desperate part of me still wanted my parents to be proud of me. I wanted to buy their love. For my mother's birthday that year, I took a chunk of my hard-earned profit and went to a jewelry store. I bought Victoria a beautiful, delicate gold necklace with a small diamond pendant. It cost me almost $800. It was the most expensive thing I had ever bought for someone else. I gave it to her at a rare family lunch. She opened the box, smiled politely, told me it was very pretty, and put it back in her purse. 3 months later, Stella moved back to Chicago after failing to secure a job in Boston. She was trying to launch a career as a social media influencer. I was scrolling through her feed one night when I saw a photo of her at a downtown nightclub, posing with a martini. Right there, around her neck, was the gold and diamond necklace I had bought for my mother. I called Victoria the next day and asked her about it. Her voice was totally casual. She said, "Oh, Stella had a big networking event and needed something to elevate her outfit. You work in a coffee shop all day, Gemma. You know how it is. You do not really understand the pressure of maintaining a public image. The necklace just suits her aesthetic better." I did not say a word. I just hung up the phone. It felt like a physical punch to the chest. But that was not even the worst of it. A few weeks later, Stella called me. She was hosting a massive launch party for her influencer brand and demanded that I cater the event with coffee, pastries, and a full barista setup. She expected me to do it entirely for free, calling it an opportunity for family exposure. I told her no. I explained that food costs money, my staff needs to be paid, and the best I could do was offer her everything at wholesale cost. Stella threw an absolute tantrum, calling me a greedy, unsupportive monster. She ended up paying the cost price, but 2 days after the event, a furious, anonymous 1-star review popped up on my coffee shop's page. The review claimed the coffee tasted like dirt, the owner was rude, and the pastries were stale. I knew exactly who wrote it. It was the exact kind of petty, vindictive move Stella was famous for. That was the moment the last remaining cracks in my heart sealed up completely. I stopped trying to win them over. I realized my family was not a support system. They were a liability. Years went by, and my 20s slipped away into a blur of early mornings and late nights. I was approaching 30, and my little coffee shop had grown into a neighborhood staple. I had a full staff, a loyal customer base, and a steady stream of revenue. But the universe has a funny way of testing you right when you think you are safe. We got hit by another massive Chicago blizzard. It was the worst storm the city had seen in a decade. The power grid in my neighborhood failed, and my shop went completely dark. I had thousands of dollars worth of premium milk, syrups, and perishable pastries sitting in refrigerators that were slowly warming up. I did not panic. I drove through the freezing snowstorm, unlocked the shop, and spent 3 days sleeping on the floor in a heavy winter coat, guarding the premises because several stores on my street had their windows smashed by looters. I hauled bags of snow from outside to pack around my dairy supplies to keep them cold. I lost some inventory, but I saved the business. When the power finally came back on, I opened my doors and served hot coffee to the freezing neighborhood. We had a record-breaking week of sales. And that was when I checked my business savings account and saw the number I had been chasing for 8 long years. I had officially saved $30,000 in pure, untouched personal profit. It was my down payment. I was finally ready to buy a home. During those successful years, I also gained a very important ally. His name was Maxwell. He was a corporate lawyer who worked in a high-rise down the street. Maxwell started coming in every single morning at 7 sharp for a large black Americano. Over the years, we started chatting. He was sharp, pragmatic, and incredibly smart. When I mentioned I was struggling to understand a complex vendor contract, he offered to look it over while he drank his coffee. Eventually, Maxwell became an informal advisor and a genuinely good friend. He would sit at the corner table, reviewing his legal briefs, while I managed the floor. Because he was around so much, he saw the times my mother would come in, order a fancy latte, complain about the temperature, and leave without tipping or paying. He saw the time Stella would storm in demanding free food for her friends. Maxwell watched my family leech off my energy from the sidelines. He told me once, "Gemma, you are running a charity for people who hate you. You need to cut the cord." I laughed it off at the time, but I knew he was right. I was 30 years old, sitting on $30,000, and I was done renting. I found a gorgeous, 1-bedroom condo in the Lakeview neighborhood. It had high ceilings, exposed brick, and a small balcony overlooking the water. It was not a mansion, but it was beautiful and, most importantly, it was going to be mine. No leaky roofs. No terrible roommates. Just a quiet fortress that I paid for with my own blood and sweat. I contacted a real estate agent named Claire and started the paperwork in absolute secrecy. I knew if my parents found out I had money, they would find a way to make it disappear. I was right to be paranoid. I just did not realize how far they were actually willing to go. Before we get into the crazy fallout and the absolute disaster of a family dinner, if you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, so thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the drama. By the time Stella turned 28 years old, her life was an absolute disaster. She had spent the last 6 years bouncing from one glamorous-sounding gig to another. She was an event planner for 3 months, a social media consultant for 5, and a lifestyle blogger until she realized nobody wanted to read her blog. She had 0 savings, a massive amount of credit card debt, and a severely inflated sense of her own importance. Her luxury apartment in Boston was no longer sustainable, so she had moved back to Chicago, renting an overpriced studio apartment she absolutely could not afford. And naturally, the financial burden of Stella's existence fell right into the laps of Victoria and Edward. My parents were getting older, and their patience with funding Stella's delusions of grandeur was starting to wear thin. But instead of cutting her off and telling her to get a real job, they turned their sights on me. The manipulation started out small. It was always disguised as casual family concern. Victoria would call me while I was closing up the coffee shop, sighing heavily into the phone. She would say, "Gemma, it is just so hard out there for your sister. The job market is so unforgiving right now. She is under so much stress. You are so lucky you found your little coffee shop gig early on." A few weeks later, Edward started stepping up the pressure. He sent me a long, passive-aggressive text message explaining that he had an unexpected medical bill. He claimed his insurance did not cover a specific procedure, and he was short about $500. He said he would never normally ask, but family has to stick together during tough times. I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, he was still my father, and the thought of him struggling with his health made me uneasy. I did not ask any questions. I just transferred the $500 directly into his bank account. I told myself it was the right thing to do. The very next afternoon, I was taking my lunch break in the back office, endlessly scrolling through social media, when Stella posted a new photo. She was sitting at a high-end brunch spot downtown, holding up a brand-new, limited-edition designer handbag. The caption read, "Treating myself after a stressful week. Thanks to the best parents in the world for the early birthday gift." I sat there staring at the screen, the blood roaring in my ears. I opened a new tab, searched the brand of the handbag, and found the exact model. The price was exactly $500. My father had not used my money for a medical bill. He had used my money to fund my sister's shopping addiction, because he was too much of a coward to tell her no, and too cheap to use his own savings. They were using my guilt to subsidize her luxury lifestyle. From that moment on, I stopped sending them a single dime. When they asked for help with a utility bill, I told them my espresso grinder was broken and I was broke. When they hinted about Stella needing groceries, I offered to give her a free shift meal if she came and washed dishes for 3 hours. Unsurprisingly, she never showed up. But my refusal to play their game only made them more desperate, and their desperation led to the biggest mistake of their lives. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. The coffee shop was packed with commuters seeking shelter from the downpour, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and damp wool coats. I was standing behind the counter, perfectly foaming milk for a latte, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I ignored it until the morning rush finally slowed down around 10 o'clock. I wiped down the steam wand, grabbed my phone, and walked into the back office to check my messages. I had a new email. It was from my mother, Victoria. When I opened it, my brain took a few seconds to process what I was looking at. The email was not meant for me. It was a forwarded thread, and the original recipient was supposed to be my father, Edward. But Victoria had clearly been careless. When she typed the letter G into the recipient line, her email client had auto-completed the address to my business email, sending the entire conversation straight to my inbox. The subject line of the email thread was simply, "Stella's living situation." I read the first message, which was sent by my father the night before. He wrote, "We cannot keep paying her rent, Victoria. My retirement fund is taking a hit. We need to execute the plan soon. Gemma has been running that shop for years. She has to have enough cash saved by now." Victoria's reply, the one she had just accidentally forwarded to me, was a long, detailed paragraph that made my blood run absolutely cold. She wrote, "I know, Edward. I am working on it. I saw a beautiful 2-bedroom condo listed in Lakeview. It is perfect for Stella. I am going to start pushing Gemma to look at real estate. Gemma is the responsible one. She will buy the condo if we convince her it is a good investment. Once she signs the papers and puts down the deposit, we just need to corner her at a family dinner. We will tell her she owes us for raising her and pressure her to sign the deed over to Stella. Stella deserves a fresh start in a nice neighborhood without the stress of a mortgage. Gemma is used to working hard. She can just keep renting for a few more years. She will cave. She always does when we push hard enough." I read the words again. And again. And again. I expected to feel sad. I expected to cry, to feel the familiar sting of rejection that had haunted me my entire childhood. But no tears came. Instead, a profound, terrifying stillness washed over me. They did not view me as a daughter. They viewed me as a financial asset. They viewed my years of waking up at 5 in the morning, my ruined hands, my absolute exhaustion, as nothing more than a convenient bank account they could raid to make Stella's life easier. They had literally plotted to trick me into buying a house, just so they could mentally abuse me into giving it away. I did not reply to the email. I did not call Victoria and scream at her. I calmly locked my phone, put it back in my pocket, walked out to the front of the shop, and poured myself a black coffee. The last remaining thread of loyalty I had for my family disintegrated into dust. They wanted to play a game of real estate and manipulation. Fine. I was going to play too. But I was going to change the rules. For the next 3 weeks, I lived a double life. To my family, I was the same overworked, compliant daughter I had always been. I answered Victoria's calls, acting completely normal as she casually brought up the idea of me buying a property. She would say, "Gemma, renting is just throwing money away. Have you ever thought about looking at a condo in Lakeview? I saw some lovely listings. It would be a great step for your future." I would bite the inside of my cheek until it bled, put on my best cheerful voice, and reply, "That is a great idea, Mom. I will definitely look into it." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was moving with military precision. I called my real estate agent, Claire, and told her we needed to move fast. I did not look at 2-bedroom condos. I looked strictly at 1-bedroom units. I found the perfect place on the 3rd floor of a beautiful brick building. It had a modern kitchen, large windows, and absolutely no room for unexpected guests. I signed the purchase agreement on a Thursday afternoon. I sat in a sleek conference room at the title company, holding a heavy black pen. When it came time to transfer the funds, I logged into my bank account and authorized the wire transfer. $30,000. Almost a decade of my life, my sweat, my burned fingers, and my lost sleep, all condensed into a single digital transaction. When the escrow officer told me the condo was officially mine, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I did not even know I was carrying. I did not tell a single soul in my family. I orchestrated my entire move in absolute secrecy. I hired a moving company to transport my furniture on a Tuesday morning while Victoria and Edward were at work and Stella was sleeping off a hangover. I changed my official mailing address, updated my driver's license, and redirected all my bills. The first night in my new condo was magical. I did not have time to unpack, so I just dragged my mattress out of a box and threw it on the living room floor. I ordered a cheap pepperoni pizza, sat on the floor in my pajamas, and listened to the rain hitting the large glass windows. There were no roommates arguing in the hallway. There was no leaky roof. And most importantly, there was no Stella. It was my fortress. I knew the peace would not last forever. I knew that eventually my family would find out that I had bought a property without falling into their trap. I knew the storm was coming, but for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the umbrella. I went to sleep that night with a smile on my face, resting up for the war that was about to begin. I managed to keep my new home a secret for exactly 21 days. I thought I had covered my tracks perfectly, but I underestimated the investigative power of a jealous sibling with too much free time. The leak did not come from my real estate agent, Claire. It came from her over-enthusiastic assistant. The assistant ran the agency's social media page and loved posting aesthetic photos of newly sold properties. One afternoon, she posted a picture of the view from my specific balcony. The caption read, "Huge congratulations to our favorite Lakeview coffee shop owner on closing her first home. Such a beautiful 1-bedroom space for an amazing entrepreneur." No names were mentioned. But Stella spent her entire life scrolling through Instagram. She followed local neighborhood pages, trying to network with other influencers. She saw the post. She recognized the specific brickwork of the balcony from a neighborhood she frequented, and the phrase "coffee shop owner" was a dead giveaway. My phone exploded while I was wiping down the espresso machine. It started with a rapid-fire series of text messages from Stella. "Did you buy a condo? Are you kidding me right now? Why didn't you tell us? A 1-bedroom? What about me?" 10 minutes later, the calls started. Victoria called 4 times in a row. Edward left a stern, angry voicemail demanding I call him back immediately because I had some serious explaining to do. I ignored all of them. I put my phone on silent, tossed it into the cash register drawer, and kept serving customers with a polite smile. That evening, I got a completely different phone call. It was from my cousin, Autumn. Autumn was the only person in the extended family who saw right through my parents' nonsense. She sounded breathless and panicked. She said, "Gemma, you need to listen to me. Your mom and dad are losing their minds. They had a massive screaming match in their kitchen, and I overheard the whole thing. They are furious that you bought a 1-bedroom place without consulting them. They think you are hiding money from them." I leaned against the counter and sighed. What are they going to do, Autumn? Ground me? I am 30 years old. Autumn lowered her voice. No, Gemma. They are planning an ambush. Edward said they are going to show up at your coffee shop tomorrow afternoon with Stella. They're going to corner you in front of your customers and make a massive scene until you agree to let Stella move in with you, or at least co-sign a luxury lease for her. They want to break you down when you are distracted. I thanked Autumn for the warning, hung up the phone, and felt a cold, sharp thrill run down my spine. They wanted an ambush. They wanted a dramatic family showdown to force me into submission. I was not going to let them ruin the sanctuary of my business. If they wanted a confrontation, I was going to give them one, but it was going to happen on my terms, on my territory. Instead of waiting for them to storm into my coffee shop, I took control of the narrative. I picked up my phone and sent a group text to Victoria, Edward, and Stella. The message was simple. I know you saw the news about the condo. I wanted to surprise you all. Please come over to my new place tomorrow night at 7 for a family dinner. We can talk about everything then. I attached the address. The replies were instant. Victoria sent a passive-aggressive smiley face. Edward simply replied, "We will be there. We have a lot to discuss." Next, I made a very important phone call to my favorite customer, Maxwell. I explained the entire situation to him. I told him about the accidental email, the lifelong favoritism, the financial abuse, and the ambush they were planning. I asked him if he would be willing to attend the dinner, not as my lawyer in an official capacity, but just as a very observant friend who happened to know the law. Maxwell actually laughed out loud over the phone. He said, "Gemma, I have watched those vultures circle you for years. Nothing would bring me more joy than watching them crash into a brick wall. I will be there at 6:30. The next evening, I prepared for the dinner. I did not cook a lavish meal. I did not set out fine china. I ordered 3 large, greasy pepperoni pizzas and put them on the kitchen island with a stack of cheap paper plates. I wore sweatpants and an oversized college sweater. I wanted them to know this was not a celebration." Maxwell arrived early. He was dressed in a sharp, casual suit, looking effortlessly intimidating. We sat on the couch, drinking sparkling water, waiting for the doorbell to ring. At exactly 7 o'clock, the buzzer sounded. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Victoria, Edward, and Stella stood in the hallway. They did not bring a housewarming gift. They did not say congratulations. Their eyes immediately began darting around the apartment, assessing the square footage, judging the furniture, and calculating the value. Victoria stepped inside, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "it is certainly very small, Gemma. I do not know how you expect to fit a guest bed in here." Edward crossed his arms, glaring at the exposed brick. "We need to have a serious conversation about financial responsibility and family loyalty," he barked. Stella just sneered, looking at the pizza boxes. "Classy as always," she muttered. Then, they noticed Maxwell sitting quietly in the armchair by the window. Victoria froze, her fake smile faltering. Edward narrowed his eyes. "Who is this?" he demanded. I gestured to him casually. "Oh, this is Maxwell. He is a good friend of mine. I invited him over for pizza. Grab a slice, everyone. The show is about to start." Nobody touched the pizza. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Victoria and Edward sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, while Stella leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling on her phone, pretending to be bored. Maxwell remained in his armchair, his legs crossed, sipping his water with an expression of mild amusement. Edward cleared his throat loudly, trying to assert his dominance. "Gemma," he began, his voice taking on that familiar, lecturing tone. "We are very disappointed in you. You made a massive financial decision without consulting the family. You bought a selfish, one-bedroom apartment when you know perfectly well your sister is struggling with her living situation." Victoria chimed in, leaning forward. "It is just incredibly greedy, Gemma. We raised you. We provided for you. And the moment you get a little bit of success, you hoard it all for yourself. Stella needs a stable place to live." I looked at them, my face completely blank. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Victoria's eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. She dropped the concerned mother act entirely. Her voice dropped to a vicious snarl. We are proposing that you fix your mistake. You are going to contact your real estate agent tomorrow, and you are going to sign the deed of this condo over to Stella. You will continue to pay the mortgage, and she will live here. I blinked, genuinely stunned by the sheer audacity. And if I say no? Victoria slammed her hand on her knee. If you say no, we will take you to court. We will tell a judge that you embezzled family funds from the business we helped you start. We will claim fraud. Sign the condo over to your sister, Gemma, or I promise you, you will go to jail. Stella looked up from her phone, a nasty, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. Just give it up, Gemma, she sneered. You are just useless anyway. You owe me this. For 3 seconds, the room was dead silent. I looked at Victoria's glaring eyes. I looked at Edward's puffed-up chest. I looked at Stella's entitled sneer. And then I looked at Maxwell. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I threw my head back and I laughed. It was not a nervous giggle. It was a loud, echoing, uncontrollable laugh that bounced off the high ceilings of my new apartment. It was 30 years of repressed anger, gaslighting, and manipulation violently exiting my body. Their smug expressions instantly vanished, replaced by shock and confusion. Victoria's jaw literally dropped. I stopped laughing, wiped a tear from my eye, and reached into the pocket of my sweatpants. I pulled out 3 folded pieces of paper and tossed them onto the coffee table. The useless one is not me, I said, my voice completely steady. It is you. Read it. Edward hesitantly leaned forward and picked up the paper. It was a printed copy of the accidental email Victoria had forwarded me 3 weeks ago. The email detailing their exact plot to manipulate me into buying a house so they could steal it for Stella. As Edward read the words, the color completely drained from his face. Victoria leaned over to look, and she let out a sharp, panicked gasp. Stella just looked confused, trying to read over their shoulders. Before any of them could speak, Maxwell stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked slowly toward the center of the room. His voice was calm, professional, and absolutely lethal. Good evening, he said smoothly. Since we are discussing legal matters, allow me to introduce myself properly. I am a corporate attorney. I have also been retained as Gemma's legal counsel. I have reviewed the email you are currently holding. I have also documented every financial transaction Gemma has made to this family over the last 8 years. Victoria started stammering, her hands shaking. This is a misunderstanding. This is private family business. It is attempted extortion, Maxwell corrected her, his tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Threatening to fabricate embezzlement charges to coerce someone into signing over real estate is a felony. It is blackmail. It is fraud. If you pursue this ridiculous threat, or if you continue to harass my client in any way, I will personally ensure that this email is handed over to the authorities. I will bury you in legal fees so deep you will lose your own home in Naperville. Do you understand me? Edward opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He looked like a deflated balloon. Victoria was hyperventilating, staring at the printed email as if it were a poisonous snake. Stella finally realized what was happening, and her smug face crumpled into a mask of pure panic. Get out of my house, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. Get out and never contact me again. They did not say a single word. They scrambled for the door, tripping over each other in their rush to escape the legal nightmare they had just walked into. The door clicked shut behind them. I looked at Maxwell, we shared a slice of cold pizza, and we toasted to my new home. The next morning, my phone was filled with voicemails. The illusion of their power was broken, so they resorted to playing the victims. Victoria left a sobbing, dramatic message, crying about how family is supposed to forgive, and how I had humiliated them in front of a stranger. Edward sent a long text claiming I was tearing the family apart over a simple misunderstanding. I did not reply. I was completely done playing their games in the shadows. For 30 years, they had controlled the narrative, painting themselves as perfect parents and me as the difficult, ungrateful daughter. It was time to show the rest of the world the truth. I opened Facebook. I selected a beautiful photo of the sunrise taken from the balcony of my new condo. Then I added a second photo. It was a clear, high-resolution screenshot of the accidental email Victoria had sent, detailing their plot to steal my home for Stella. My caption was simple and brutal. I wrote, "I earned every single inch of this home through 10 years of hard work, burnt hands, and sleepless nights. I did it completely alone." For anyone wondering why I will not be attending family holidays anymore, please read the second photo. I hit post, and I turned my phone off for the rest of the day. When I finally turned it back on that evening, the fallout was apocalyptic. The post had dozens of comments. Extended family members, aunts, uncles, and cousins who had believed my parents' lies for years were absolutely horrified. An aunt who always used to scold me for not visiting left a comment saying she was disgusted and entirely ashamed of Victoria and Edward. Several of my parents' neighborhood friends left comments expressing their shock. The perfect suburban facade was completely shattered. Stella, in a desperate attempt at damage control and a stunning display of delusion, decided to fight back on the internet. She launched a campaign on a crowdfunding website. She titled it, "Help Stella Find a Safe Home." In the description, she painted a tragic picture of herself as a struggling young professional who had been cruelly evicted and betrayed by a greedy, wealthy older sister. She begged the internet to help her raise $10,000 for a down payment on an apartment. The campaign was an absolute disaster. It raised exactly $50, and I am pretty sure Victoria donated it. Instead of sympathy, the comment section of her fundraiser became a war zone. Cousins and old high school friends dragged her relentlessly, calling out her designer handbags, her expensive vacations, and her absolute refusal to hold down a real job. The internet tore her apart. Embarrassed and defeated, Stella deleted the campaign less than 12 hours after she launched it, and she locked all her social media profiles. A week later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It was a formal-looking letter on cheap legal letterhead. Edward, in a final, pathetic attempt to regain control, had hired a discount lawyer to send me a cease and desist letter. The letter demanded that I take down the Facebook post and apologize for defamation, or face a lawsuit for emotional distress. I did not even panic. I walked down to the coffee shop, poured a fresh cup of dark roast, and handed the letter to Maxwell when he came in for his morning visit. Maxwell read it, chuckled, and pulled out his phone. He called the number on the letterhead right there in the middle of my shop. I listened as he introduced himself, cited 4 different legal statutes, and calmly explained to the other lawyer that truth is an absolute defense to defamation. He then promised to countersue for harassment, legal fees, and attempted extortion using the email as evidence if they ever contacted me again. The phone call lasted less than 3 minutes. The fake lawsuit disappeared into thin air, and I never heard from my parents' discount lawyer ever again. As for the family, they got exactly the reality check they spent 30 years avoiding. My cousin Autumn told me that Victoria and Edward became total social pariahs in their suburban neighborhood. Their friends stopped inviting them to barbecues, embarrassed by the public exposure of their toxic behavior. And Stella? Without my money to steal, and with our parents' retirement fund draining fast, she finally hit the concrete wall of reality. About 2 months later, Autumn sent me a sneaky photo she took at a suburban mall. It was a picture of Stella, wearing a terrible polyester uniform, standing behind the cash register of a discount clothing store, looking absolutely miserable as she folded a pile of cheap jeans. The golden child finally had to get a job. I looked at the photo, felt a brief wave of pity, and then permanently deleted it from my phone. Today, my life is incredibly peaceful. My coffee shop is expanding, I am looking into opening a second location, and my condo is perfectly decorated exactly the way I want it. I wake up every morning, step out onto my balcony, and breathe in the cold, fresh air coming off the lake. I built my empire on scraps, I defended my fortress, and I cut the toxic roots out of my life so I could finally grow. So, I finally cut the cord and chose my hard-earned peace over their toxic demands. I watched my sister face the real world for the first time, and I did not lift a single finger to help. But there are still nights I wonder about the concept of family loyalty. Tell me, was I wrong to expose their email publicly and let them lose everyone, or did they get exactly the reality check they deserved? Would you ever consider letting them back into your life if they begged for forgiveness? Let me know your verdict in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed it and have not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our upcoming daily drama. See you in the next one.